So is the rapid acceleration of change, is that the biggest risk, more than the technology itself? Just the ability for it to change so quickly and evolve so quickly, is that sort of scarier to you than what we might come up with? I don't sense you're scared by any of this, actually, but the risk.
Of course, of course. Well, yes. Look, I think what's happening is for example, just even talking about the elections, Hillary and Trump are not addressing issues that are happening here in the modern world, like artificial intelligence, gene editing, designer babies, huge things that have already happened and that will continue to happen. They're still addressing Social Security, taxes, foreign policy, just like they did for the last 50 years. The problem is that nothing is going to be as important to Social Security as this anti-aging or this longevity movement that's underfoot right now. I mean, when everyone lives 150 years, you can just throw out your Social Security, and that 150 years is already happening. We might only be a few years from reversing or stopping aging through genetic editing. So the questions that they're asking and the questions that the media is leading the country to ask, I think is a lot of times backwards. Things are changing much quicker than before, and we need to learn to adjust to those changes. And so far, nobody, especially the top people in the government, are adjusting to that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I read a book called 2030 by Albert Brooks. It was his fiction novel about what he thinks America is going to be like in 2030. And one of the issues that he thinks we're going to face the most is that our aging population is going to keep staying alive. And because of that, the economic strain that it's going to put on young people is going to cause not like a racial war, but like an age war. Wow. Because the young people are going to keep paying into a system to keep older people alive who aren't producing as much for society. And that's just one of the many. That's what popped into my head as you were saying that. Just there's so many issues. We're focused on the same 5 things. The designer baby thing is another one that's good because it's like we're always focused on abortion, but there's a lot of other ethical things that are popping up, whether we talk about them or not.
Of course. And, all of them are interconnected. The abortion thing is classic. My wife is an OBGYN at Planned Parenthood, so I'm, directly connected to a lot of that stuff. And the designer baby thing is so amazing because we now, there's a couple universities around the world working on artificial wombs. And they've actually been able to raise a kind of a goat from a little embryo all the way to basically almost being alive. And we basically probably have this technology to do this with our children, in 10 years' time, meaning that you can bypass basically the human body almost entirely. And you don't even need to have sex. And then there's other methods too. You can just take a shot and combine your own DNA. There's cloning techniques. So the whole world is changing so dramatically. And people are still stuck on the concept of, whether, you're pro-life or pro-choice, when just literally 5 to 10 years from now, there's going to be a huge amount of new technologies that not necessarily make that question obsolete, but change that question so dramatically. For the pro-lifers, if you can preserve a life and you have this ectogenesis or this artificial womb, do you ask society, do you ask somebody to give up the baby and then raise it there, even if it's only been 1 week old? And then there's this other idea that we can now keep, it used to be that the limit was 26 weeks, and that's when a baby could survive, outside the womb. Well, we're going to get it down to so a baby can survive in 12 weeks here in the next couple of years. That changes again because then you're like, well, where is that line? So technology is making the world crazy. Hopefully, obviously, in a good way. But what's happening is a lot of ethicists and a lot of the government is not able to keep up with how fast it's changing.
Right. Well, even that example that you gave is really great. So if you're against abortion and you wouldn't want someone to have an abortion, but let's say the woman wants to have the abortion, and if the technology exists to keep that fetus alive, 2 weeks after insemination, if something exists, well then, is it the state's responsibility to pay for that? Who has to pay? So there are real world, it sounds like sci-fi, but there are real world implications that could be happening right around the corner.
And probably within 10 years, we're going to be able to keep a 1 month old or even less of a fetus alive. And that's going to be a very difficult question, I think, for society to face. The good news, though, is there's also going to come into technology like your phone that can just scan or just take a blood test and within minutes of having sex tell you whether you're pregnant or not, or whether that's happening. Not minutes, but maybe within 12 hours. So you'll have better, and then probably be other ways because of morning after pills to terminate it, sort of like, just take vitamins or whatever, something like that. Right. Making the whole system a bit easier so there's a counterbalance, because obviously, if technology goes to one side, then maybe we'll have to actually revisit this entire question as a society back to the Supreme Court. And the problem is, though, technology changes so quickly that even the idea of having babies inside a womb is going to become something that I think is going to be very controversial. There's, let's be honest, giving birth is something that's very medically dangerous. Oftentimes involves major surgery if you have a C-section, whatnot, and an evolving, I don't want to get myself in too much trouble, but an evolving country, an evolving society would try to make it so that motherhood does not involve that type of medical danger. And that's where the artificial wombs are going to come in. It also means that women don't have to take off all that time off work. And now we can kind of get back to the equal pay area and say, is that what caused it? Or was there really discrimination built into the system? I think there probably is, but it would be a way to solve it. But what's most interesting is, again, just going, thinking about transhumanism, in the next 10 years, all these things are going to be changing because of all these different types of technologies that we have, and rewriting what our father, what our parents taught us was right or wrong, and saying, well, the rules have changed. I mean, the greatest example that's happening right now is Mothers Against Drunk Driving. It's one of the largest nonprofits in the country. And I have 2 kids. Who wants to deal with any drunk drivers? But driverless cars will literally wipe out this tragic problem that the whole world has, because nobody will be driving drunk anymore. And it's a great idea, for how a single technology has eliminated a problem that has literally killed hundreds and millions of Americans' lives at this point.
At the same point, of course, the counterbalance would be that someone could hack into the system and
of course
all kinds of other problems.
And he could be drunk in front of a computer.
Right.
So yeah, it gets crazy.
So there really, I mean, you mentioned the Matrix before, but it really, when you open up the Pandora's box of this stuff, the sort of offshoots that you can go to are really endless.
It is, and I think what's very interesting is, and I hope, this is one of the most difficult challenge I think with my candidacy and talking about transhumanism, is how do economics work into it? Because what capitalism has done is always like, someone moved forward on this end, well then there was a competitor or some other idea here, and so there always was a pretty good balance. But as we move forward, I'm not sure, like when everyone loses their jobs due to robots and whatnot, whether that balance will continue. And that's when it gets dangerous, because so far technology has been neutral, and it's been the people who have made it, bad or good or whatever. In the future, we need to somehow, maybe through regulation or just maybe, crossing our fingers and hoping that that balance continues, and that technology and science continue to make our lives better, but doesn't become some kind of dystopic world. And of course, as all the sci-fi books point out.
Right, so it's interesting because you're, on one hand, you're describing yourself as a left libertarian, but you're acknowledging that some regulation might be necessary because we'll we'll evolve ourselves out of the system at some point if we don't do that.
So I took a funny bus tour across the country for 4 months on my campaign. And I mingled a lot with truck drivers because they were all on the road, and we were hanging out with them quite often, and the truck stops. And they've now had in Europe, they had 10 big giant semi-rigs drive driverless across the continent. And America is only a couple years away from having driverless trucks. We have about approximately 4 million truck drivers. These are grown men, many of them like guns. Many of them would not be able to get other jobs very easily because they've been truck drivers for the last 20 or 30 years. And they're going to potentially be replaced here in a few years. We're talking 4 million jobs and grown men. So what do you do with that? You can't just say, oh, we're going to give you welfare. They probably wouldn't settle for that. These are men that'll say, no, I got a gun. Don't tell me what to do. So one of the things I'm trying to do at the party and with my campaign is establish, economic parameters that might help people move into the new transhumanist age, either through a universal basic income, there can be a libertarian version, or or other different means. But whatever it is, we don't want the government to become Big Brother. But at the same time, we realize that we're not sure capitalism can survive if robots start taking everyone's job.
Right. So in that case, you would be for a universal basic income, so that it would really just be a transition, sort of, for some of these people that maybe would just put their hands up and be like, the world's passing me by here, so let me survive.
Well, and the good thing about a universal basic income, which I do support, but I support a kind of a thinner one, and it's not one that says overnight I want it to happen. It's got to be something that's transitions slowly so that all of the economies don't fall apart. But yes, at some point I think we need to consolidate welfare, we need to consolidate Obamacare, we need to consolidate Social Security, into one giant package that says, even if you're gonna, because we have this other issue that anyone that's born today is almost certainly not going to die, or there's going to be so many different types of technologies out there that can keep you alive indefinitely. I mean, when you look at the lifespan age, it's doubled in the last century, and it's going to quadruple. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that if people live that long, we need to do something for them. They need to have something that they can feed themselves, house themselves, be able to live a life where they don't cause civil strife. And that's really my main worry, because for me, I don't really like the idea of a universal basic income from a humanitarian perspective. I actually like competition. I think that's good. But what I really don't like is revolution or civil war. So that's more. And from a science perspective, the best thing to do is keep peace. So a nice compromise is a universal basic income.
Yeah, so is the inherent flaw of all this that all of these technologies are going to be accessible to rich people or wealthier people or people with more means earlier? And that ultimately, and poor people, even with a universal basic income, won't have access to this stuff. And we're going to almost create like a series of superhumans and a series of old school, non-chip, regular people. And it'll really be like your human experience will be completely different than probably more than 50% of the world.
The question you just asked is the question I get asked the most, because everybody worries about it.
I thought it was a good one.
Yeah, no, it is a great one. But it's the one that everyone worries about, because everyone knows most people are not part of the 1%. I'm certainly not part of that 1%. So I worry about the question too. And I want to make sure that that 1% doesn't take that technology and leave me in the dust. Because in the same way we're seeing accelerating technology of this J curve, people improving, technology growing so quickly, people's access, or the rich people's personal improvements might actually skyrocket. And you might find, like, for example, through gene editing technology, someone's child has 30 to 40% smarter than your child because they were able to afford the augmentation technology. Well, that's now society's unfair. Now we're getting into, Brave New World type of stuff. So we need to, as a society, come up with a plan where that 1% doesn't leave us behind. It's not the same playing field it was before.
Right.
The world is changing too quickly. So even though I want to stay as a libertarian, I understand that if we don't do something different, it could explode in a bad way.
Right. And I guess you could argue that that's happening now anyway, right? Because right now, if you're wealthy, you can get your children to the best doctors, you can get them to the best schools, all of those things. I'm sure every metric there is would show that they're going to have a better chance to succeed in life. So we're just adding the technological component to it in this discussion. But this is stuff that's going on already.
No, and you're right. I mean, when you look at how much longer rich people live than poor people, it's about 25%, And when you look at how much more educated they are, the facts speak for themselves. So, I broadly would like to create a society with much more equality in it. But I think the issue right now is that that's a very difficult thing to do under all the circumstances. There's just too much. Right now, inequality seems to be growing. Technology seems to be accentuating that. Mm-hmm. And at some point, we're going to have to step in and say, wow, the world's changing really quickly. We better take a long, hard look at this. And one of the reasons we actually, I delivered a transhumanist Bill of Rights to the US Capitol, and one of the very most important rights in it is that everybody has a universal basic right to an indefinite lifespan, or access to transhumanist technology, because of this very real concern that maybe only 10% are going to get it, and that change would be so much more dramatic than the 10% even becoming wealthy. I mean, what if the 10% become 500% smarter genetically. We're no longer dealing with the same species then practically.
Yeah.
So we have to be careful we don't go down that path. I mean, if you think Black Lives Matter, is something that is controversial, well, what are you talking about when you say, the 1% have now become these gods practically? I mean, that's something that I think is gonna be far more controversial. We can't let that happen.
So getting away from the human side of this, or the individual side of this, I think there's an interesting piece of this that's nation related. Are there any countries right now that are doing a better job at this stuff, that are really looking at the future of this stuff and the ethics and all the things we're discussing better than the United States right now? I suspect we're not doing it particularly well.
Well, I mean, you have to kind of go back to what happened with George W. Bush and his, essentially 16, 15, 17 years ago, stem cell technology was one of the most important technologies, and it still is, of the 21st century. And it's doing wonders right now for replacing, giving people mobility back that have been in accidents and paraplegics and whatnot, and other types of treatments too. But he created this atmosphere where when he shut down federal funding for stem cells, literally for 7 years during his 2 terms, there was set a precedent that was very anti-transhumanist. And the bioethicists that he had in the White House were very anti-radical technology.
Can you explain for people that have no knowledge of this whole thing, what the ethical argument was over that?
Sure. Well, a stem cell essentially came from aborted fetuses originally.
Yeah.
And that was, and then they were taking stem cell technologies, and stem cells are essentially original cells in your body that can become any different type of cells. But the problem is, in the very beginning, we were getting those stem cells from aborted fetus tissue. And that was very controversial to the Republicans. And of course, since we had a Republican in office, he said, no, the federal government is not going to support research on stem cell technology. And then what happened is Obama came into office and said, listen, stem cell technology is not about abortion or anything like that. It's about helping people and helping hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, which has now happened. So Obama reversed the stem cell issue that George W. Bush had put in, and now there's been all this funding going into it, and all of a sudden, stem cell technology is back as one of the great 21st century treatments. But the problem was that it said, what George W. Bush did set a precedent, kind of what all the transhumanists around say. That was the very first anti-transhumanist government thing that stood in the way of our health. Because a lot of people think stem cells might even be used for something like heart disease, or it is being used for heart disease or for cancer treatment, meaning it can be a life extension technology. We can live longer. So if a president steps in and says, you can't do that, he's also saying, we're not interested in you living longer. We have ethical frameworks that we have to work around. And that's when transhumanists were like, whoa, the government has gone too far. And this is why it's very important that the bioethicists that are in the White House, that are supporting the president, that are supporting the government, are for technology and science. You can have a scientist who doesn't love science, and believe me, that doesn't help the human race. That's not good.
So every week on this show, for one reason or another, I say that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So in a case like this, I would suspect that George W. Bush's decision-making was that he was looking out for the unborn child. So I don't think his intentions were malicious. However, the result of his intentions were to go against what science can allow us to do. And I guess the bigger issue really is that if they had stopped it completely, no government funding, and we're going to prosecute you if we find out that you're doing this on your own, someone's still going to do it. So doesn't, in a way, that would make it more dangerous? Because then you'd have only people doing it outside of the system?
Of course. And so setting up, the question you asked earlier, this is exactly what sort of happened. And I agree with you. I don't think George W. Bush, of course, wanted to end lives early. I mean, he really just was trying to, follow the wishes of his party and protect the unborn child. So I know that. But what happens is that it becomes a national issue, and the end result for many people, including myself, was that my life and the healthcare system is less because of it. But I think what's happened now is this sets a precedent for genetic editing, which is sort of the next stem cell, the next war that the governments are fighting sort of with scientists right now. Genetic editing, the CRISPR-Cas9 technology, allows you to sort of take your genetic nature and structure it almost like you would software code. You can put in different pieces, so we're able to create animals that have much heavier muscles. I have friends that are already starting to look into trying to grow a third eye on the back of their head. Why didn't evolution give us a third eye? I mean, it sounds crazy, but that's something that we can start to think about with CRISPR technology. It's probably 10 or 15 years out, but it's something that we're going to be able to do. The idea of growing another set of arms is now 100% possible because of this gene editing technology. Now you can see that's very, very controversial. Wow, you want 4 arms? Well, how does that work? I mean, if you're in the Olympics, is that something different?
Right. I mean, this is Island of Dr. Moreau.
Of course. So China, about 1.5 years ago, started working on the very first embryo and modifying it with this genetic technology. It sent the medical community into shockwaves, like, oh my God, they're creating monsters, this and that. So immediately, a bunch of moratoriums were, people were arguing to put a moratorium on the technology. And luckily, that didn't exactly happen, but the American government has stepped in, and now they're considering the issue. Luckily, there's actually been pockets of CRISPR technology that have now been approved, at least with some government consent to move forward, because it's a technology that potentially can eliminate every single disease, as well as do all sorts of other amazing things. The one that you hear a lot about with CRISPR technology is, should we eradicate the mosquito by creating a mosquito that doesn't have malaria and that breeds with others, and then no mosquitoes will ever have malaria. Right. That's what CRISPR can do.
Right. Wouldn't this then lead to Jurassic World? We create a dinosaur that's better than every other dinosaur, and then it destroys the park, eats all the people, and kills all the others?
That's where the ethical quandary is, and that's why nobody is really sure. Now, I may not be super supportive of AI technology because I worry about it, but I am 100% supportive of CRISPR. I think as long, in the transhumanist community, we have this thing called morphological freedom. It's pretty much the most important fundamental right. Morphological freedom means the right to do anything with your body so long as it doesn't hurt somebody else. And that means growing a second head, as controversial as that is. That's what it means. It also means, the ability to change yourself gender-wise, anything you want to do. You should be able to do it. If you can do it through that way, it's 100% okay. And most transhumanists believe in, I strongly believe in that. I think what's going to happen in the future is America and society as a whole is going to have to grapple with this new civil rights era of people using this genetic technology to change themselves so dramatically. I mean, you talk about skin color, we're talking about, transhumanists are talking about the bar on Tatanui in Star Wars. Yeah. I mean, we're talking about very different species. That's what some of my friends are trying to do when they're using this technology. I have friends right now that are trying to splice in plant DNA into their skin with the CRISPR, so that they can photosynthesize from the sun, so they no longer have to eat food. That's how dramatic this CRISPR can go. And you could solve world hunger that way too.
Yeah, wait, so people are actually testing this stuff on themselves, which I think is kind of fascinating. So you have the chip in you, but you weren't testing it on yourself. You knew it was a proven technology, well, basically a proven technology at the time, right?
Yes, although the chipping thing is very controversial. It's not FDA approved or anything like that. And in some states it can also be illegal depending on how it's administered, because you actually have to get someone to put it in you. But those things aside, the chip's not a very big deal, but there came out last year a DIY CRISPR kit for around $100 that you can mess with and start taking apart your own genes and mixing it with other genes and then putting it back inside you and see if anything happened. Now, it's very rudimentary. That doesn't work.
Yeah, this sounds incredibly dangerous. I mean, I'm on board everything you've said here, but this sounds...
Of course, and this is why they're so controversial. Now, most of these people have no idea what they're doing, right, and they're I don't want to say they're amateurs, but they're citizen scientists, but there are some with, that at universities doing the exact same thing on a much bigger level. I mean, CRISPR was basically born out of MIT, and they're the people that are literally going to be changing the world. And like I said, it's been funny, even the Wall Street Journal, I think New York Times, everybody was running the controversy about using CRISPR to eliminate malaria, because here we've had Bill Gates, spend so much money on, thankfully, trying to eliminate malaria. It kills about 750,000 people every year. And we might have a chance to literally eliminate it entirely through this type of technology. But should we do it? What if we eliminate the mosquito and all of a sudden half the populations fall apart because, it's like introducing rabbits somewhere. We don't know really what happens.
Right.
But at least it's got the country talking about it, and it's got it talking about not the third arm. I think the third arm, like I talk about, is a bit weird. But the mosquito is a good way to approach this radical technology that you can literally alter the genetic structure of a species to make it so that it's more friendly for humans.
So these people they buy the kit and they go, all right, I'm going to get some photosynthesis going on my arm so that the sun will re-energize, or the sun will not re-energize me, it'll feed me.
Essentially,
effect,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So okay, so the sun's going to feed me. I mean, this sounds like the beginning of a Marvel comic book, right? Where the guy then turns into a tree, and
it is.
The tree man is
of
now,
course,
you know.
Of course, and we're entering that age. I think what's so, I mean, and you know, it gets really even weirder. You know, I've even heard of a person trying to grow a second penis, for example. I mean, it can go really crazy what people want to do. And I think though.
So is that the problem really, when you combine this with politics, that someone would watch, let's say you were polling at 10% right now, right? Like it was actually making a dent in that way. The takeaway from this interview would be someone would get you saying second penis. That would be the thing. And then they would go, he's some kook scientist, blah, you know, saying all this crazy stuff. And that is sort of the big flaw of all of this, trying to combine cutting edge science with our antiquated political and media.
Oh, I know. And if I do this again in 2020 and I'm for a bigger party and I have a better shot at it, I won't be saying things like that. I have the luxury of a few more interviews where I can say
this.
But no, you know, but I think we have to take a bigger step. I think in 4 years, this technology we're talking about, it's not going to be some far out science fiction thing. It's going to be something everybody's already heard of. We're already going to be using CRISPR technology to cure cancer. We already have cured some cancers, or at least in some people with it. Because you can go into their genetic structure and change things. It's just like coding. And I think at some point, people may have to grow up with how fast technology is changing around America and not say, oh, I'm taking a soundbite just so I can sell ads for CNN or Fox or whatever. And I'm going to actually hear what this person has to say, because if they did, they'd say, wow, this guy doesn't want to do that, you know. But what he's saying is, isn't it amazing what we can actually do with with this new technology?
And the thing is, whether they like it or believe in it or not, it's happening. So you either get on the train or...
And it's happening so quickly. You know, CRISPR came out like 18 months ago, and now we're already talking about, you know, eliminating, for example, the mosquito. I mean, that's a 750,000 deaths a year again. We're talking about a major humanitarian push for a science that's about 18 months old. That's like unheard of.
We could have got major views if you would have brought one of those kits and you could have done
done a little something
on me right there.
Make it glow a little.
That would have been something.